The cop didn't hesitate. Not for a second. His hand shot forward, grabbing the young girl's arm with unnecessary force. She cried out, not in defiance, not in anger, but in pure shock. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," the officer snapped, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. People in the park froze. Some stopped walking. Others turned slowly, sensing something was wrong. The girl tried to explain. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said, her voice shaking. But the cop wasn't listening. He never planned to. In one sharp, reckless motion, he twisted her arm to force compliance. A sickening crack cut through the air. She screamed. Her knees buckled as pain shot through her body. Her arm hung unnaturally still, her face pale with shock and fear. Conversation stopped. Birds scattered. The park fell into an uneasy silence that no one knew how to break. The officer stepped back, barely reacting. Instead of concern, there was irritation on his face. "Maybe next time you'll learn to follow orders," he said coldly, adjusting his uniform like nothing serious had happened. A few people gasped. One woman covered her mouth. A man nearby clenched his fists, torn between fear and anger. The girl tried to hold back tears, cradling her arm as pain pulsed through her body. She wasn't resisting. She wasn't threatening. She was just hurt badly. Still, the cop smirked. He had the badge. He had the power. And he believed that was all that mattered. What he didn't know, what he couldn't imagine, was who this girl really was. He had no idea that her calm demeanor came from years of discipline. No idea that the strength in her eyes came from a father who taught control, not violence. Most importantly, he had no idea whose daughter he had just injured. Because when her father found out, this wouldn't be about fame, or anger, or revenge. It would be about accountability. And by the time the truth came out, that badge he wore so proudly would feel heavier than ever before. This was the moment everything changed. The moment a single act of arrogance set off a chain of events no one at that park would ever forget. The park had been peaceful that afternoon, the kind of calm that made people slow their steps and breathe a little easier. Children laughed near the swings. Joggers passed by with headphones in. Elderly couples sat quietly on benches, enjoying the warmth of the sun. Nothing about the moment hinted that it would soon become unforgettable. Steven Seagal's daughter had come there for the same reason as everyone else, to enjoy a normal day. No security detail. No attention. Just jeans, a simple jacket, and a quiet confidence that came from discipline, not privilege. She had grown up learning respect for herself and for others. Her father made sure of that. She wasn't loud, she wasn't reckless, and she certainly wasn't looking for trouble. Nearby, a police cruiser rolled slowly along the curb. Inside was Officer Daniels, a man who wore his badge like armor and his authority like a weapon. Among fellow officers, he was known for his attitude. Among civilians, he was known for something else entirely. Intimidation. Daniels believed compliance mattered more than fairness. To him, respect wasn't earned, it was demanded. And when he spotted the young woman near the park entrance, something about her calm posture and unbothered expression irritated him. He stepped out of the car, adjusting his belt, scanning the area like he owned it. "Hey, you," he called out sharply. She turned, surprised but composed. "Yes, officer?" Daniels narrowed his eyes. He asked questions that didn't quite make sense. Why was she standing there? Who was she waiting for? Did she have identification? His tone wasn't professional, it was probing, confrontational, almost daring her to respond the wrong way. She answered politely. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't challenge him. "I'm just waiting for my friend," she said calmly. That should have been the end of it. But the officer wasn't interested in ends, he was interested in control. "You don't tell me what you're doing," he snapped. "I tell you." People nearby began to notice. Conversations faded. A few heads turned. No one wanted to get involved, not with a cop who clearly enjoyed asserting dominance. She took a step back, instinctively creating space. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she said, still respectful, still calm. That calmness irritated him even more. Daniels moved closer, invading her personal space. His voice dropped, sharp and condescending. "You think you're special?" She shook her head. "No, sir. I just want to leave." But leaving wasn't what he wanted. To him, obedience meant submission, immediate, unquestioned. And when he didn't get it, his patience snapped. What began as a pointless interaction turned into a power play, one that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with ego. Around them, Tension thickened. A mother pulled her child closer. A jogger slowed, uncertain whether to stop or keep moving. An older man nearby frowned, sensing something was very wrong. Still, no one stepped in, because the badge creates fear, and fear creates silence. The officer reached out, grabbing her arm not to protect, not to restrain legally, but to assert dominance. She flinched, shocked more by the sudden aggression than anything else. "Let go," she said, her voice trembling for the first time. That was the moment everything tipped. Daniel saw resistance where there was none. And instead of de-escalating, he chose force. No one knew then who she was. No one knew who her father was. They only knew they were witnessing something they shouldn't be, a misuse of authority unfolding in plain sight. Somewhere else in the city, Steven Seagal was in a meeting, calm, focused, unaware that his daughter's quiet afternoon was turning into a nightmare. But the truth has a way of traveling fast, and soon, the wrong man would learn that power used without restraint always comes at a price. The moment stretched longer than it should have, a single second where everything could still be undone. Steven Seagal's daughter felt the officer's grip tighten around her arm. It wasn't the controlled hold of someone trained to protect. It was careless, aggressive, driven by frustration rather than law. "Please," she said quietly, trying to pull back. "You're hurting me." Those words should have stopped him. Instead, they fueled him. Officer Daniels mistook fear for defiance. In his mind, any movement that wasn't instant submission was resistance. And resistance, to him, demanded force. "Don't pull away," he barked. People nearby froze. A few took hesitant steps closer, unsure whether to intervene or stay back. Phones came out, hands trembling as cameras began recording. Everyone could feel it. This wasn't routine. This was something going wrong. She tried to steady her breathing, remembering what she'd been taught her whole life. Stay calm. Don't escalate. Protect yourself without provoking. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Control is strength. But control only works when both sides respect boundaries. Daniels didn't. He twisted her arm sharply, trying to force it behind her back. The movement was fast, reckless, and completely unnecessary. There was no warning, no attempt to de-escalate, just force. A sharp sound cut through the air, not loud, but unmistakable. Her body reacted before her mind could. Pain exploded through her arm, stealing her breath. She cried out, her voice breaking as her knees gave way. People gasped. Someone shouted, "Hey, that's enough." Her arm fell limp at her side, no longer responding the way it should. She clutched it instinctively, tears streaming down her face not just from pain, but from shock. She hadn't attacked him. She hadn't threatened him. She had done everything right, and still. This happened. Daniel stepped back, finally realizing the crowd had grown. For a split second, uncertainty crossed his face. Then it vanished, replaced by irritation. "Stop acting," he snapped. "You brought this on yourself." The words landed heavier than the injury. A woman nearby shook her head in disbelief. A man stepped forward, anger flashing in his eyes. "She didn't do anything." "Back off," Daniels warned, hand hovering near his belt. "This doesn't concern you." And just like that, fear pushed people back into silence. The officer radioed in, his voice calm now, professional on the surface. "I need medical assistance. Suspect resisting." Suspect. The word echoed in the minds of everyone watching. She sat on the ground, trembling, cradling her arm as pain pulsed through it. Her vision blurred, not just from tears but from the overwhelming realization that the very person meant to protect her had caused this. Sirens approached in the distance. Daniels looked around, straightening his uniform, adjusting his posture. He was already rehearsing his version of events. He'd done this before. He knew how it worked, but what he didn't notice were the cameras still recording, the witnesses quietly speaking to one another, the expressions of disbelief and anger spreading through the crowd. Paramedics arrived quickly, pushing through the gathering onlookers. One look at her arm was enough for them to exchange a glance. "This needs to be stabilized," one of them said gently, kneeling beside her. "Try not to move." As they worked, Daniel stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching not with concern, but with impatience. "She resisted," he said flatly. "I followed procedure." No one replied. The ambulance doors closed, and as it pulled away, the park felt different. heavier. Like something had been broken that couldn't easily be fixed. Across the city, Steven Seagal's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, expecting a routine message. Instead, his expression changed instantly. Calm gave way to focus. Silence filled the room around him as he read the words again. Dad, I'm hurt. I'm at the hospital. That was all it said, but it was enough. He stood up slowly, his jaw tightening not with rage, but with resolve. He didn't ask questions. He didn't raise his voice. He simply picked up his jacket and walked out. Because when authority crosses the line into abuse, and silence enables it, accountability is no longer optional. And the man who caused this had no idea just how close accountability really was. The hospital corridor was filled with the quiet sounds of urgency, rolling wheels, distant voices, the soft beeping of machines. Steven Seagal's daughter lay on the examination bed, her arm carefully stabilized, her face pale but composed. Pain still pulsed through her body, but what weighed heavier was disbelief. She replayed the moment over and over in her mind. She had followed every rule. She had spoken respectfully. She had stayed calm, and still, she was here. A nurse adjusted the sling gently. You're going to be okay, she said softly. We've called an orthopedic specialist. She nodded, though her throat felt tight. Her phone rested beside her. She hesitated, then typed a short message. Dad, I'm hurt. I'm at the hospital. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. Across the city, Steven Seagal read the message in silence. Those who knew him well recognized the shift immediately, not anger, not panic, but focus. The kind of stillness that comes before action. He didn't slam doors, didn't shout questions. He simply stood, grabbed his jacket, and left. Back at the park, the mood had changed completely. The officer remained near his cruiser, speaking casually into his radio. But the confidence he'd worn so comfortably earlier had begun to crack. People hadn't left. If anything, more had gathered. Whispers filled the air. That wasn't right. She wasn't resisting. Did you see how he twisted her arm? Several people approached another officer who had arrived later, quietly offering statements. Phones were still recording. Someone had already uploaded a clip online. Comments were pouring in faster than anyone could keep up. The badge had created fear before. Now it was creating scrutiny. Officer Daniels noticed the shift. He felt eyes on him, not respectful, not intimidated, but judging. He cleared his throat, adjusting his posture, reminding himself that procedure was on his side. At least, that's what he told himself. At the hospital, a doctor entered the room, his expression serious but calm. You have a fracture, he said. It will heal, but it's going to take time. She closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the words. Time. Time she hadn't planned to lose. Time taken by someone else's ego. Minutes later, the door opened. Steven Seagal stepped inside. He didn't rush to the bed, didn't speak right away. He looked at his daughter first, really looked. The sling, the tension in her face, the effort she was making to stay strong. Then he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. I'm here, he said quietly. That was all. The doctor explained what had happened medically. Steven listened without interruption, nodding once, his expression unreadable. When the doctor finished, Steven asked a single question. How did this happen? She told him calmly, clearly, without exaggeration. She described the officer's tone, the unnecessary escalation, the moment force was used. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. That hurt more than anger would have. Steven thanked the doctor and stepped outside into the hallway, pulling out his phone. He made a call. Then another. Back at the park, word spread fast. Internal affairs is on the way. Someone important is involved. Daniels overheard snippets and scoffed, trying to brush it off. People exaggerate, he muttered to a fellow officer. I followed protocol, but doubt crept in anyway. At the hospital, Steven returned to his daughter's side. You did nothing wrong, he said firmly. Remember that. She nodded, tears finally slipping free. Outside the room, a uniformed officer arrived, accompanied by a supervisor. Their tone was different, careful, measured. Mr. Seagal, the supervisor said, recognizing him instantly. We'd like to speak with you. Steven stood. Good, he replied calmly. So would I. Back at the park, Daniels' radio crackled. His name was called. Officer Daniels. Report to the station immediately. He frowned. What for? There was a pause. Effective now. You are relieved of field duty pending review. The words hit harder than he expected. Around him, conversations stopped. People watched openly now, no longer afraid. The power dynamic had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. Daniels looked around, suddenly aware that the crowd he once intimidated was now witnessing his fall. He didn't know all the details yet, didn't know the full truth, but one thing was becoming painfully clear. This incident wasn't disappearing, and neither was the man whose daughter he had hurt, because calm doesn't mean weak, and silence doesn't mean powerless. Sometimes, it's just the pause before accountability arrives. The hospital conference room was quiet, but it wasn't calm. 2 senior officers stood near the door. A supervisor flipped through a folder filled with printed screenshots, witness statements, and timestamps pulled directly from body cam footage. No one rushed. No one joked. This was no longer routine. Steven Seagal sat at the table, hands folded, posture relaxed but unyielding. The supervisor cleared his throat. Mr. Seagal, first, let me say we're sorry this happened to your daughter. Steven nodded once. I'm here for facts, he replied evenly. Not apologies. That set the tone. The supervisor clicked a remote. A screen lit up on the wall, showing paused footage from Officer Daniels' body cam. The image was clear. The park, the crowd, Steven's daughter standing calmly with her hands visible. This footage has already been reviewed, the supervisor said carefully. And more importantly, it's been preserved. He pressed play. The room watched in silence as the encounter unfolded, the aggressive questioning, the unnecessary proximity, the escalation that came from nowhere. Then the moment of force. The scream, the crowd reacting in shock. No one spoke. When the clip ended, the supervisor turned back to Steven. This does not align with the officer's report. Steven's voice remained calm. No, it doesn't. At the same time, across town, Officer Daniels sat alone in a small interview room at the precinct. The confidence he'd worn so easily earlier was gone. His foot tapped nervously against the floor as internal affairs officers entered, files in hand. Your statement says the individual resisted arrest, one of them said, flatly. Daniels nodded. She pulled away. The officer across from him slid a tablet across the table. Is that what this shows? Daniels stared at the screen. It showed the same footage, unedited, undeniable. His jaw tightened. She was non-compliant. She was injured, the investigator corrected. And, unarmed, silence followed. Back at the hospital, the supervisor leaned forward. Mr. Seagal, because of the severity of the injury and the evidence presented, Officer Daniels has been formally suspended pending disciplinary action. Steven didn't react outwardly. Additionally, the supervisor continued, the case has been referred to an independent review board. Steven finally spoke. That's not a favor, he said quietly. That's procedure. The supervisor nodded. Yes, sir. It is. The door opened, and Steven's daughter was wheeled in briefly so paperwork could be signed. She avoided looking at the screen. She didn't need to see it again. Steven stood beside her, steady and present. One of the officers hesitated, then asked, Do you want to file a formal complaint? Steven didn't answer immediately. My daughter already paid the price, he said finally. Now the system needs to do its job. That answer spread fast. Within hours, the footage leaked, not by Steven, not by his lawyers, but by witnesses who had recorded the incident from different angles. Online, the story exploded. Headlines didn't focus on a celebrity. They focused on the footage. Officer suspended after park incident leaves young woman injured. Witness videos contradict police report. Steven Seagal's name appeared later not as a threat, not as leverage, but as context. At the precinct, Daniels watched the news on a muted TV. He saw his own face frozen on the screen. The moment replayed again and again. For the first time, the badge didn't protect him. That evening, Steven sat beside his daughter's bed as she rested. The hospital room was quiet now. Outside, the city buzzed with reaction and outrage. But inside, there was only a father and his child. I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't want this. Steven shook his head gently. You didn't cause this, he said. You revealed it. She looked at him, confused. Abuse survives in silence, he continued. Truth doesn't need force. It just needs light. Later that night, A formal statement was released by the department. Words like investigation, accountability, and policy review filled the page. They were careful words, legal words, but everyone knew what they meant. The story had crossed a line from rumor to record, from denial to documentation, and Officer Daniels' name was now attached to something that wouldn't disappear. The reveal wasn't loud. There were no dramatic confrontations, no threats, no raised voices, just evidence, just truth, just the slow, unstoppable shift of power back to where it belonged. Because when the truth stands on record, no badge is heavy enough to hide behind. Morning light filtered through the hospital window, soft and pale. Steven Seagal sat quietly beside his daughter, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in his hand. The city outside had already moved on to its next headline. But inside this room, time felt slower, deliberate. A knock came at the door. 2 uniformed officers entered, followed by a man in a dark suit carrying a thick folder. Their expressions were serious, respectful. "Mr. Seagal," the man said, introducing himself as a representative of the review board. "Thank you for meeting with us." Steven stood calmly. "Let's get this done," he replied. They sat. The man opened the folder, laying out documents one by one. Based on body cam footage, witness statements, and medical reports, Officer Daniels has been found in violation of department policy on use of force. Steven listened without interrupting. "The findings are clear," the man continued. "Effective immediately, Officer Daniels has been terminated from active duty." The words landed quietly, not with satisfaction, not with triumph, but with finality. Steven's daughter exhaled slowly. Not relief exactly, but release. "There is more," the man added. "The case has been forwarded to the district attorney's office for further review." Steven nodded once. As it should be. Across town, Officer Daniels stood in the precinct hallway, a cardboard box in his hands. Inside were personal items, a nameplate, a photo, a badge that no longer carried authority. No one stopped him. No one spoke. The same halls he once walked with confidence now felt narrower, heavier. The power he relied on was gone, not taken by force, but by consequence. Back at the hospital, the review board representative hesitated before speaking again. "Mr. Seagal, many people in your position would be demanding restitution. Statements, press conferences." Steven looked at his daughter. She was resting now, eyes closed, breathing steady. Healing had begun not just physically, but emotionally. "My focus isn't punishment," Steven said finally. "It's prevention," the man nodded. "We've already initiated department-wide retraining on de-escalation and accountability." "Good," Steven replied. "Make sure it's more than paperwork." Later that day, Steven and his daughter left the hospital together. She moved carefully, her arm supported, but her steps were steady. Cameras waited outside, reporters calling his name. Microphones extended. Steven stopped. "I'll say this once," he said calmly. "This isn't about who I am. It's about what happened." The crowd quieted. "My daughter was treated unjustly by someone entrusted with power. That should concern everyone, not because of my name, but because it could happen to anyone else. No accusations, no threats, just truth." That evening, the department released another statement. Officer Daniels' termination was confirmed. The language was careful, but the message was clear. Actions have consequences. Inside the precinct, officers gathered for a mandatory briefing. A senior captain stood at the front, voice firm. "This incident is a reminder," he said, "that authority without restraint destroys trust. We are here to serve, not dominate." Some officers nodded. Others looked down. The message had landed. Days passed. Steven's daughter began physical therapy. The pain was still there, but so was strength. She refused to let bitterness take root. She focused on recovery, on moving forward. One afternoon, she asked her father, "Did you ever want to confront him?" Face to face? Steven considered the question. "No," he said honestly, "because this was never about him. It was about the system correcting itself." She smiled faintly. "I'm glad." In a quiet office miles away, Officer Daniels watched the city from a window. His future uncertain. For the first time, there was no uniform to hide behind, no authority to lean on, only reflection. The resolution didn't come with cheers. There were no dramatic arrests, no raised voices, just accountability, slow, firm, unavoidable. And as Stephen walked beside his daughter through a quiet street later that night, one thing was clear. Justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives calmly, with evidence, integrity, and the courage to let the truth speak for itself. The city returned to its normal rhythm. Cars filled the streets again. Parks echoed with laughter. Headlines moved on, replaced by newer stories, louder arguments, fresher distractions. To the world, it was just another incident filed away in the past. But for those who witnessed it and those who truly understood it, something had changed. Steven Seagal walked beside his daughter one evening as the sun dipped below the horizon. Her arm was still healing, her movements slower than before, but her posture was steady, strong, not because she felt invincible, but because she had learned something deeper than physical strength. "I keep thinking about it," she said quietly. "How easily it could have gone unnoticed." Stephen nodded. "That's why it matters," he replied. "Not because of what happened to you, but because of what usually happens to people without a voice. Power, when unchecked, grows careless. Authority, when unquestioned, grows dangerous." The officer hadn't woken up that day planning to hurt someone. But arrogance doesn't need intention, it only needs opportunity. And too often, silence provides it. What stopped this story from disappearing wasn't fame. It wasn't money. It wasn't influence. It was evidence. Witnesses who chose courage over comfort, and a system forced finally to look at itself. Stephen's daughter returned to her routine slowly. Physical therapy, small victories, pain that faded inch by inch. She didn't carry hatred with her, she carried awareness. She knew now that respect is not guaranteed by calm behavior alone. It must be protected by accountability. Stephen never gave another interview. He didn't need to. His message had already been delivered, not through speeches, but through restraint. True strength doesn't roar. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't seek revenge. It stands firm and lets truth do the work. Somewhere else, a former officer sat alone with his thoughts, stripped of uniform and authority. No crowds, no applause, just consequences, the kind that linger long after attention fades. And maybe, for the first time, he understood something no training manual had ever taught him. A badge is not a shield against responsibility. It's a promise to uphold it. This story wasn't about a celebrity's daughter. It was about every ordinary person who has ever been made to feel small by someone wearing power like armor. It was about how quickly dignity can be taken, and how slowly trust is rebuilt. If there's one lesson to carry forward, it's this: respect isn't selective. You don't offer it based on status, appearance, or obedience. You offer it because every human being deserves it. And when someone forgets that, when authority crosses into abuse, silence becomes permission. Speak up, document, stand with those who are harmed. Because accountability doesn't weaken institutions, it strengthens them. Stephen looked at his daughter as they reached the end of the street. She smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because healing was real. "We're okay," she said. He smiled back. "Yes," he said softly. "Because truth showed up, and that is how real justice works. Quietly, firmly, without fear."